Welcome once again to the Cow Report, and I'm your host Chuck Lee. And with me tonight, of course, we are coming to you live from the L.E. Phillips Memorial Library in downtown Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This is January 9th, 1995. I want to welcome you to the program. And with me tonight is Pastor Roy Radcliffe from Madison, Wisconsin. And I want to welcome you to the program, Pastor.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And we will be discussing an individual who is in the annals of history with several other people, and that individual is Jeffrey Dahmer. And through some unusual circumstances, you came to know Jeffrey Dahmer in the last few months of his life. And so we'll be discussing your role in helping Mr. Dahmer become baptized and leading him to a better understanding of Jesus Christ. So for the audience tonight, we will be taking calls. We're going to kind of lay some groundwork, and then we will take calls in a little while. And hopefully my sidekick, Fred Stafford, will be here if he's locked out of the building, or hopefully he'll ring the doorbell, but he hasn't made it yet. He was a little bit under the weather over the weekend with a serious cold, and he's kind of been doctoring himself with some vitamin C, and hopefully he's going to make it. So, first of all, Mr. Radcliffe, I wanted to get a little background on you, and what kind of background as far as Christianity, and where are you coming from? You're from the Madison area. You pastor a church in Madison?
Yes, yeah, I preach for a congregation in the Madison area. Yep.
And how long have you been in that capacity?
In Madison, I've been there since September of 1990, so a little over 4 years now.
Okay. Now you are with the Church of Christ denomination, and have you always been with that denomination? Did you?
Yes,
Did
yeah.
you go to a seminary, or?
Well, we don't have seminaries per se. I went to colleges and then was accredited at that point, and then have been preaching ever since 1970. So I've been at this for a little while.
So you got a few years under your belt in this area. Okay, and the name of your church is Madison Church of Christ?
Basically just Church of Christ. We happen to be in Madison, so...
All right, okay. And of course you're married and
yes.
Have a few children?
I have a son and a daughter, yes.
All right. Okay, now we're going to be delving into what brings us here tonight, and that's the unusual circumstances of the state of Wisconsin. Unfortunately, and Jeffrey Dahmer actually has a relationship with the Chippewa Valley. His mother and even him might have lived in Chippewa Falls when he was younger. I know his mother was from that area for a while. So it's kind of interesting that kind of made a full circle now, and we're just a few miles from Chippewa Falls, and we're discussing Jeffrey Dahmer. Unfortunately, November 28, 1994, Mr. Dahmer was cleaning he was cleaning an area of the prison, and he was attacked and murdered. But let's back up to where you come into the picture. Can you give us a little bit of the background of how you came to be involved with Jeffrey Dahmer?
Okay, well, the story actually begins with his father. His father had been a member of the Church of Christ for several years in the past. I didn't know this at the time. In fact, when I first met Jeff, one of the questions I asked him is, what's your religious background? So I was quite surprised to hear him say Church of Christ, which is what I am too. But his father had stopped going to church for a long time. And then over the course of the years, and I think especially after Jeff's imprisonment, he began going back to church. Of course, it's easy to understand how someone would turn back to God when they're going through a personal crisis. And in going back to church, he became connected with a group of scientists who believe in creationism. He's a member of the Institute for Creation Research, I think. And Jeff had become very interested in evolution and as an atheist. So his father sent him some materials to challenge that belief. And Jeff read that, and it really clicked with him. It really made a connection. Jeff would tell me later that that's really where the beginning point of his amazing journey started. A little bit later, then, his father also wrote a book, which was publicized all across the nation, describing how guilty he felt as a father and how he'd raised Jeff, and maybe, he spanked him too hard, or maybe, the teacher gave the guppies to the wrong kid, or something, the various reasons he's looking for as a father would. And of course, Jeff denied all of that. And when this was publicized all across the nation, two individuals saw that interview, and they were deeply moved to send Jeff a Bible and Bible correspondence courses. One was a man who'd been a prisoner in the past also. He's an ex-convict, but he's in the prison ministry. His name is Curtis Booth from Crescent, Oklahoma. He sent a Bible and a Bible correspondence course to Jeff. And about a week later, then Jeff received a Bible and a Bible correspondence course from a Mary Mott in Alexandria, Virginia. Both of these did this independently. They didn't know about the other one at all. So Jeff took both courses, and the reason he did is because the groundwork had been prepared by his father. His father had kind of opened his mind a little bit. So he began studying his way through, and at the end of each course, then he wrote back to each one of them, "I want to be baptized. Please find someone to do this." Well, one's from Oklahoma and the other's from Virginia. They don't know anything about Wisconsin, so they're calling every place they can think of. I finally hear through the Oklahoma branch he had contacted someone in Milwaukee. Well, Milwaukee from Portage is a pretty good distance. And so the person in Milwaukee knew me, and so he referred him over to me. And so then I contacted the chaplain to determine that this was really a true request and not just someone pulling a practical joke or something like that. And when the chaplain said yes, it was true, well, then we had to arrange for a meeting for me to go in and meet with Jeff and to determine face-to-face if that was what he really wanted and why and so forth. And then from that point on, it was simply a matter of determining how we're going to do that. Prisons aren't made for baptisms. You see, they're not thinking along those lines when they make the prisons. And once we accomplish that, well, then we just simply set up a weekly study with them from that point on.
Okay, now, maybe, I don't know if you had any apprehension or not about meeting this diabolical person. He's a cannibal. He's Hannibal Lecter incarnate. He's in prison for the rest of his life. He's still a young man. Brutal murders. The families are still very upset. If you've seen some of the videos and TV programs where the family's been on, and that some of them celebrated his death, and the murderers were sent presents in prison. But here you are. You're walking into Portage to the Columbia Correctional Center, which is it's a hardcore prison, and most of the people in there are doing very long prison terms. What were your feelings? What was going through your mind when you walked in there? What were you thinking about?
I'd never really been in a prison before. Since this experience, I've learned there's a whole lot of prison ministers out there, and this is a routine thing for them. This was my baptism into the whole prison business, if you pardon the pun. And so for me, it was kind of intimidating to get there, and to, first of all, I had to make arrangements through the chaplain. And the first thing I discovered is you don't call up and say, okay, I'll be there this afternoon or I'll be there tomorrow. No. They need a whole lot of time to make sure you're who you are, who you say you are, that you're not going to do something subversive or whatever. So at any rate, it took a couple of weeks before I could even get in there in the first place. And when they know you're coming ahead of time, well, then you come up to these doors which are locked, and there's an electrical, alarm thing there, and they will buzz it, which will let you in one door, and then you can't get to the next door until that one closes. And, so you have a whole lot of intimidating devices. And that kind of bothered me a bit. And of course, all the uniforms and so forth, which I kind of expected. I didn't know what to expect. Because I'd seen movies, I thought maybe I'd sit behind a glass partition or something of this nature and talk on a phone. No, they took me to a little room, a little bit bigger than a little bit smaller than what we have here. We sat at a table about this size, and he sat across from me, and then the guard left, and he and I were simply left alone to sit and talk. While I was waiting for him to show up, they put me to this room and set me down, and I'll go get Jeff, he says. And so you're sitting there, and I begin to have the same kind of sensation that you generally have when you go to the doctor's office, and the nurse takes you into the doctor's office, and the doctor will be with you soon, and he doesn't come, and he doesn't come, and he doesn't come. You just kind of sit there and notice the sweat trickling from different parts of your body. That's about all. I didn't know what to expect, and I was a little bit nervous. And then lo and behold, there he was in the doorway, and so I stood up and reached and shook his hand, and he sat down, and once we began talking, he was no longer the infamous, lector, cannibal type person. He was just a young man who had some questions, and I was able to talk to him and deal with him from that standpoint there.
At that time, how long had he been in prison, roughly? Because you're talking around April of 1994 when
That's
you
right.
first met him.
Yeah.
So he'd been in several years already, or a couple of years?
I think just a couple of years.
Incarcerated, at least under the control of authorities. I can't remember the exact date, but it seems like 91 or somewhere in that area is when that was.
Now, I don't recall the exact date either. I think it was either 91 or 92 was when he was arrested, I believe anyway. So it had just been a couple of years, really, is all that he'd been in there.
So what were the first volleys between the two of you as far as, do you recall what you two talked about when you first said?
Well, yeah, I said, so you want to be baptized, huh? Why do you want to be baptized? Which is a normal question I ask most people who come to me with that. I do that for a number of reasons. I want to find out if the person has a genuine understanding of what it's all about, or whether they just want to do it because Aunt Matilda did it, or Brother Bob did it, or, it seems like a nice thing to do, or what the reason is. And from that, I gathered that he had really spent some time studying the Bible on the whole thing, and had reached a conclusion of his own. He told me that he had never considered it very important in the past, but because of the studies he'd had, now this was something that was very important to him, and he really wanted to go through with the whole thing. And then I'd ask him about his religious background, and we talked a little bit about this. I had seen the interview that everyone else had seen, and I don't recall whether it was Dateline or 2020 or whoever that did the whole thing. But on that particular interview, they had asked him about his urges. This is the famous urge quotation, where he had confessed that he was glad he was in the prison, and because he still fought with the urges, and was glad that he wasn't out in the open, because if he was in the open, he'd still have these problems. So anticipating that, I turned to a passage in the Bible from Ephesians chapter 1 and about verse 19, where Paul says to the Ephesians, I want you to know certain things. And one of the things he wanted to know was the power that's available to the Christian to simply live the Christian life. And so I talked a little bit about that, and his response was, well, he says, I don't have any power. This is something I could really use. So that was kind of the keynote upon which we built the whole thing. When I finally said, yes, I'll baptize you, he kind of relaxed in a very unusual sort of way. And I said, well, what did you do that for? And he said, well, he was afraid. Now, here's kind of the irony. Everyone anticipates my being nervous. Okay. He was even more nervous than I was, because he was afraid I would say, baptize you? You're too evil. You're too wicked. There's no way you could ever be baptized because of the seriousness of your sins. Mm-hmm. And when I didn't approach it that way and was, took it very seriously, well, he just greatly relaxed, and it kind of eased the feeling he had, and it made him a little more human, and was able to make me deal with him a little bit better.
Now, it's just you and him in the room there. The guard had left.
That's right.
Was he handcuffed or anything?
No, he was just as free as you are.
Well, that's really amazing, because you see some of the movies, and
oh, yeah.
they got shackles on their feet and on their hands, and a lot of times there is a glass barrier between you, or at least a table. But that is unusual, that they would just leave you two alone like that.
Yeah, we were just left alone. There was a window so a guard could look in from time to time if they wanted to. The only time he ever really had handcuffs on was after he had been attacked in July. And then he went into what they call a lockdown. That is, they locked him up as well as the person who had attacked him. And when I would come to see him, well, then he'd have to be brought to me in handcuffs and leg irons, which they'd have to release. And so he'd come with the imprint of the handcuffs on his wrist. But that only lasted a couple of weeks. Then the lockdown was pretty much finished. That was a peculiar situation anyway.
Did when you started discussing the Bible with him and Christianity and baptism, did he appear to have a good grasp of Christianity? Did he know what he was doing?
Oh, yeah, I had the impression he had a pretty good understanding of what he was dealing with and what he was trying to understand. I'd asked him about his religious background earlier, and he said, well, he'd gone to the Church of Christ until he was only about 3 or 4 or 5 years of age, and then his parents had stopped going, and then he hadn't gone anywhere from that point on at all, other than maybe when he visited his grandmother, he'd go to church with her. So he had virtually no or none religious training at all beyond that point in time. So I was dealing with him primarily as a person who was kind of like a sponge, absorbing as much as he possibly could. And he was an awful lot like a sponge, except that he was incapable of distinguishing between good thoughts or bad thoughts. And so he would have to ask me, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And would bounce ideas off of me.
Did he, well, you're sitting there in a maximum security prison, nowhere to go, you're both there. Did he ever tell you what it was like to be in prison? Did he talk to you about the
No.
situation he was in and the hopelessness of his future?
We didn't really deal with that. I would ask him how things were going, and since he was in a prison, obviously you get a little bit of that. His life generally was very boring. What was it like this week? And about the big event of the week might be, I got a haircut this week. Oh, I got a flu shot. I got to see the dentist. Whoopee. I don't see another one for another 6 months or however long it would go. So there really wasn't much that he could talk about in his cell that he felt was interesting enough to really share with me. I did ask him how he got along with the other prisoners after his attack in July. I was very much concerned about that. And he had said that was an exception because that particular prisoner was new to the unit, had never really spoken to him at all, was a Cuban, and wanted to get back to Cuba so desperately that he thought by doing something really outlandish that he'd be deported. Of course, he didn't know the rest of Cuba had other plans. They wanted to come the other way. So that's kind of interesting that he didn't pick up on that. But he said as far as he and the rest of the other prisoners were concerned, he got along really well with them. They knew each other, and they knew each other's backgrounds and what they were in for and how long they were going to be in and things of that nature. And for me, that was confirmed, because normally I didn't get to see other prisoners, but it was confirmed on the day of his baptism. Because on that day, I was being escorted by the chaplain and 2 prison guards and Jeff to the medical facility where they had the little tub that we baptized him in. And we walked by a couple of other prisoners who came by with mops and brooms, and they were doing some kind of chores, and they saw him, and they called out to him kind of jokingly, "Hey, JD, how's it going?" And he said, "Oh, it's going great. I'm going to be baptized." And they had the feeling that the mood was almost that if they could, they'd do a high five or something like that. So that suggested to me that he was telling the truth, that he really thought he got along real well with all the other prisoners.
Okay, we'll be taking some phone calls, and we urge you to stay on the line if you've called. If you don't mind, this is a live call-in program, and we do have callers, and so we've had somebody waiting about 20 minutes, so we'd like to take that call. And so we're going to go to the calls now, and go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi, how you doing?
Okay.
So, hey, there's something different about you. Didn't you have a beard last week?
No?
And what's different here?
Well, Fred's not with us tonight. I don't know where he's at. He hasn't shown up yet, but...
Another one of those nights, huh? Must have forgot.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, do you have a question tonight for Pastor Radcliffe?
Oh, yeah, I got a few questions. I got a couple for you and a couple for him.
All right.
For the both of you, have you ever guys seen the Red Green Show?
No?
Oh, you should watch it. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
For your guest.
All right.
He's a priest, right?
Pastor.
Oh, for how long?
I started in 1970, so this will be my 25th year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long time.
Yeah, that's it. I like your shirt there, Chuck. It's pretty
Thank you.
snazzy.
It's color coordinated with my hat. Since Fred's not here, I have to carry on the coordination.
Yeah, I hear you. Can you do that Dave Zine bike thing again that you've done a couple weeks ago?
Well, we'll see if we have time for that. Well, thanks a lot, caller. We appreciate your call, and we'll be taking other calls tonight. But I want to get back to Jeffrey. Now, you say there was no fear in there. You didn't, after you got acclimatized to the inner workings of the prison, you felt okay? You didn't have any apprehensions about being there?
No, not at all. Yeah, it's kind of surprising. I think to a great extent I was ignorant, and my ignorance helped. I knew that he had committed terrible crimes, and I knew vaguely some of the details of the crimes, not that much. I knew that he had been accused of cannibalism. I knew that he had murdered several people, and that's about it. And it wasn't until after I'd been with him several times, and my wife, who worked in a library, had checked out some library books and insisted that I read some things about him to find out. And it wasn't until I read 5 books about him that I began to be confronted with some of the gory details, which I was really generally unaware of. I think my ignorance helped me to relate to him on a personal basis, rather than coming at him with a bias or prejudice that would hinder my from relating to him in any sort of way.
How much time was it from the first time you met him up till the day that he was baptized then?
I met him on April the 20th. I got the first call about him on April the 6th, and it took me until the 20th before the prison would let me in. And on that day, then I agreed, okay, we'll baptize you. So we had to work out the details, and there's little lessons you learn about the prison system that I didn't know about, and that was one of the first things I learned on that day. The first thing I learned was when I first called with him, you don't do anything quick with a prison, everything is slow. And then on the day that I met with him, and after a meeting with him for a while, I said, well, why don't you go back to your cell, and I'm going to find a chaplain and see if we can talk about this. So he went back to his cell, and I started wandering around trying to find a chaplain's office. And lesson number 2 is you don't wander around that kind of a prison escorted. They quickly grab you and set you back where you were, and we will go get the chaplain, but you stay put. Oh, okay, so fine. So I learned, and so then I talked to the chaplain about what arrangements they had, what accommodations they had. Did I need to donate something or bring something in, or did they have something there that was available, and so forth. And so they were going to look around, and I was going to do some research about seeing if I could get a baptistry donated and so forth. And that took a few weeks. And so the next time that I saw him, I met him on April the 20th. The next time I saw him was on May the 10th, which was the day that we baptized him. And at that point then, after the baptism, I then insisted that I be allowed to come in and see him on a regular basis, just to study with him and to kind of nurture the faith that he had and let it build, which up to then was a strange thought to Jeff. He'd never even thought about that. And so he felt doubly blessed on the day he was baptized. Not only was he baptized, but hey, someone's going to come in and study with me on a regular basis. This is great.
Did you have any sense of history or sense of urgency, or what you were doing had been done throughout the ages? Did you correlate that with Saul or anybody of that nature? Did any of that?
Well, the metaphor of Saul would be pointed out to me several times by several other people. Saul described himself, I'm assuming you talked about Saul of Tarsus later,
yes,
known as the Apostle Paul. Saul described himself as the chief of sinners. And if we today were to choose a sinner and call him the chief, most of us would probably pick on Jeff, I assume, because his sins are so heinous and so horrid and unimaginable. And so there's a parallel between Saul and Jeff, and then of course that would put me in the role of Ananias, I suppose, the guy who baptized Saul, except that unlike Ananias, there was no sense of dread on my part, no, why me, Lord, here, twist my arm, I don't want to go, please don't make me go type of a thing. Rather, I felt like, well, if this is what he wants to do, I'm glad and willing to do that. So there was no sense of apprehension in that sense on my part.
Well, those who don't know the story, Saul was on his way to Damascus to go round up some more Christians and kill some and jail some. And Saul's job was to go around. He's kind of a bounty hunter. He went around killing and arresting and beating up and whatever it took to eliminate this new Christian movement that was out there, these followers of Christ. And so he was on the road to Damascus, and he almost was struck by a bolt of lightning, but he fell off of his horse, and he couldn't see, and he knew something had happened to him. And God spoke to him verbally and said, why do you kick up against the pricks, Saul? And from that time on, Saul had a conversion. Did you get a sense that Jeffrey was going through a conversion? Was it genuine? Did you see?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I felt it was real genuine on his part. In fact, I got a lot of evidence from that after his death. I mean, this occurred to me afterward. I received from him a card on Thanksgiving Day, which described in great detail his sense of appreciation and thankfulness for me and all the parts that I played. And then I received phone calls from several of his pen pals, or people who had written to him. And they had all indicated that they had seen a marked change in his attitude through what he had written just in the last 6 months of his life. And then when I met with his father, Lionel, the night before when we did the memorial service, Lionel had mentioned to me that when he talked to Jeff on the phone, and they talked about once a week, that he had noticed a remarkable change in Jeff in the past 6 months of his life as well. So yeah, there was no doubt in my mind that there was a conversion that was taking place, and it was continuing to change, and that he was completely changing over from the kind of person that he had been.
Now, can I get?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
If we can have some order out there in the studio.
There,
Try
yeah.
and keep the sound down out there. We'd like to get a close-up of this birthday card, or not birthday.
It's a Thanksgiving card, yeah.
Thanksgiving card from. You can back off just a little bit. There. It says, "With special blessings," and inside, this is the. You want to get back in there? Let's see. I'll hold it so we can get. It says, "Dear Roy," and it says, "Thank you for your friendship."
Camera one.
There, excuse me. There. Okay. "Thank you for your friendship and for taking the time and effort." Why don't you go back to the camera you had on there? You had a good shot up there. Well, anyway, it says, "Thank you for your friendship and for taking the time and effort to help me understand God's Word. God bless you and your family. Sincerely, Jeff Dahmer." I'm sure that's was probably gotten out of the prison commissary.
I think so. It was given to me the last time I saw him, which was the day before Thanksgiving. So it was kind of filled with that whole Thanksgiving mood and so forth. We were taking turns praying at the end of our session, and it was his turn to pray on that day, so his prayer was full of the same kind of Thanksgiving, mood and spirit. He was thankful for me and the part I'd played in his life, and the changes that had occurred in his life as well. So I saw some major changes in him that were of a Christian nature anyway.
Okay, now Fred Stafford has joined us. Glad you could make it,
Yes.
Fred. Did you fall in the snowbank outside? or
No,
what?
I had 2 meetings to go to, and one I didn't realize until I got a telephone call, and since I take the minutes, I had to be there.
Okay, well, Fred has made it in now, and we'd like to keep quiet out there in the studio. We've got some new staff helping us, and your voices carry up front here, so let's keep the voices down. Okay. Now, getting back to leading up to the day of the baptism, is it walking down to a whirlpool area? Is this part of the kitchen, or?
No, it's part of their medical facility. They have a facility that's attached to the prison, but it's all for medical purposes. And this was a small tub about 3 foot wide, about 4 foot long, and had a little whirligig in it, and it was only about 18 inches deep. So he had to kind of get in there and scrunch up and, get really, as tiny as he possibly could, almost in the birthing position, the fetal position. And then I was able to push him under the water so that he was totally immersed, which is the kind of baptism that we do.
Well, he's about 6'2" or something, isn't he?
No, as a matter of fact, he's smaller. I thought he would be a large person too.
I guess it's part of the whole mystique about Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah. He was shorter than I am. I'm 6'1", so I would guess if he was 6 or 5'11", it'd be more the size that I was thinking about. And not really slender built, but not terribly heavy either. Not as heavy as other people would be. He was smaller than I thought he would be. I guess maybe the mystique had kind of captured my imagination too.
Okay, we've had another person that's been waiting quite a while, so we'll take a call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Chuck. Hi, Fred. Pastor. 2 questions.
Yeah.
Sure, the first question being, I'm kind of curious about your motivation behind dealing with Mr. Dahmer, and more specifically, you seem, you've spent a considerable amount of time with Jeffrey, and I can understand initially to find out about the situation, but don't you feel, there's other avenues you could take your time that would be more justified? Can you help me understand that a little bit more?
Okay, thank you. Evidently, he doesn't understand Christianity. When you start on that path, you just don't drop it and go on to something else.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood the point of the question, but you're right. Once you start saving a soul, it's something you don't give up on. And saving a soul is more than just one moment. It's something that you keep working toward or keep working on. It was important to me that I continue meeting with him because I felt his faith needed to be nurtured. It's one thing to simply baptize him and say, well, see ya, which I think a lot of people expected me to do. Yeah, there's lots of things I could do with my time, and there's lots of things I do with my time, but I felt that was worth taking the time to go see him.
So he's kind of a meek individual. I'm sure he doesn't have much self-esteem left.
Oh,
his
no.
future wasn't very bright. I'm sure he knew that.
That's right, yeah.
He knew he wasn't going to go anywhere the rest of his life.
No, in fact, he expressed to me on several occasions a sense of deep remorse and regret for the things he had done. He would say, I feel very guilty for the things that I've done. Well, there's not much we can do about that now other than to, continually throw ourselves upon God and say, well, help me to accept my own sense of forgiveness. I think a lot of times it's more difficult for us to, it's easier for us to forgive one another or forgive other people than it is to forgive ourselves. And I think he felt that same sense too. There was a sense where he really mourned for the things that he'd done in the past and felt very badly about them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now, when you got him in the whirlpool or whatever exactly it was, it wasn't very big, it's crunched down there, you got enough water on top of him to baptize him in the manner of the Bible precepts?
Yeah.
And so did he have any words of wisdom, or did he say anything when he came out, or just before he was baptized? Did he have anything to say? Or
well, no. Right afterward, when he came up out of the water, I said something to him that I usually say to people that I've baptized. I say, welcome to the family of God. And he heard that and says, well, thank you. This is great. This is a tremendous thing. He was very jubilant, not necessarily jumping for joy because they don't let you do that in prison, but you could tell that he had a very pleasant attitude, disposition about him. Even the guards themselves and the chaplain seemed to be very touched by the beautiful moment that we had there. They began telling little stories about people they knew that had been baptized or that they had seen or they had been or something of this nature, which is a common experience for me too when you have a moment like that as well. So no, he didn't have any, like last words of, I go down a sinner, come up a child, nothing like that, no.
So but you could tell then that there was like a big, could you see the weight was coming off of his shoulders?
Oh, yes. Before we went in to baptize him, I had a couple of questions to ask him, and one of the questions was, do you realize what we're doing now has something to do about your sins? Oh, yes, he understood that very well. He understood that very much. Then the second question I had to ask him was, I think this is evident, but, do you believe Jesus is the Christ? Well, he went on for a couple of minutes on that one there, but yes, he felt very strongly that Jesus was the Christ and was somewhat irritated that every time he'd been interviewed in the past, that had always been edited out. That wasn't the image that the others wanted him to be portrayed as, and so he was very glad that I was the first one to come along to actually present him to the world as someone who actually believed that Jesus was the Son of God.
Okay. Fred, we're going to take a call here in a minute, but
Yeah.
do you have any questions?
How many times had you met with him before he accepted our Lord?
I only had the opportunity to meet with him the one time on April the 20th, and then from that point on we were arranging the time of the baptism itself, which was on May the 10th. And then from May the 10th on until his death, I met with him every week from that point on. So just the one time was the only time that I met with him prior to the baptism. That was primarily to ascertain that he understood what he was talking about, what he was wanting to do. And then the main concern he had, and the one that I was also concerned about, was how are we going to do this in this kind of a setting? Because when they build prisons, they don't have that in mind.
Right.
Now, they do have a prison chaplain, but
Yes, they have two prison chaplains. Yeah,
they have a belief that didn't really
that's right.
talk much about baptism.
That's right. Yes, they had viewpoints that didn't coincide with my understanding of baptism. Yes.
But Jeffrey saw the need.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Okay. We're going to take another caller here now. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
I guess my opinion on Jeffrey Dahmer's baptism, I guess they should have put him in a 55-gallon drum of acid just like they did all his victims. He wasn't worth anything more than that, and I'm sure glad of what happened to him in prison.
Did you have a question?
No, I just have an opinion.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, caller.
Thank you.
Well, that wasn't much a question, so we'll try one more here. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Pastor. You seem like a real knowledgeable and intelligent fellow. What I'd like to understand is, did you drive up from Madison today, or?
Yes, I did.
Okay. My question being is, how can you justify spending time with two fellows that are so unknowledgeable and, excuse me, worthless? Thank you.
Well,
I don't know if he's talking about us or two prison guards or what.
I came up because I was asked to come up, and I really had no idea or knowledge, nor have I formed any opinion about the knowledge or lack of knowledge of the people that I'm with. So I can justify it by the same reason I would justify anything that I do. I'm simply responding and to what I've been asked to do, and sharing the story, which I think is a valuable story.
We appreciate you driving up in this kind of weather, too. Because how was the roads on the way up there?
Generally, they were pretty good up until the last 50 miles or so. Then the snow began to get pretty bad.
Okay, now you said Jeffrey convinced you that it wasn't a gag.
Yeah.
Exactly how did he do that? I mean, he wasn't trying to manipulate. I mean, but
Yeah, there was nothing to be gained from manipulation. One of the things that a lot of people have misunderstood is that we were dealing with the question of the salvation of a soul. We were not dealing with the question of parole or reducing a sentence. That never entered either his mind nor did it enter my mind. And anything we did had absolutely nothing to do with or had no effect upon his position with the prison at all. So it's like apples and oranges. Neither one of them fit together at all. So yeah, I listened to him and talked to him in much the same way I listen and talk to you or to one another to determine whether or not I think a person is sincere or not. It's hard. I mean, I have been fooled, and I'm sure others have been fooled as well. I usually go by a principle that I find in the Bible. Jesus said in Matthew 12, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. What I understand that to mean is the only way I can know what's on another person's heart is by listening to them speak. And listening to them speak long enough, eventually, even though people lie, eventually the truth will come out, and they'll trip themselves up the lie. So you keep listening to the words, and I believe you ought to listen to what I call the heart as well, to pick up the feeling and the emotion and the meaning that's there. And I've learned to do this over the years, and it was simply a matter of talking to him and seeing by watching his eyes and his bodily expressions and the tone of his voice, as well as listening to his words, that he genuinely wanted to do this. It was not something nothing was to be gained from it at all, other than the salvation.
after the baptism, then you started meeting with him weekly. Now, was it just you two?
Yes.
Continued to meet up till November then?
That's right, yes. Every week we would meet about an hour at a time.
So there wasn't any circle or Bible study
No.
with other people? Just
No.
the two of you?
That's right, yes. I was open to that. In fact, one of the chaplains had asked, would I be willing to do that? I said, sure, great. If there's any more that want to come in, great, fine. But none of the others ever showed an interest. It was just Jeff himself. He did try to talk to some of the other prisoners about that, but none of them seemed to be interested in it at the time.
Now, leading up to the first time he was attacked in the chapel there, did he give you any sense of anything that was going to be happening in the next few days, or was he worried?
Oh, you mean before it?
Yeah.
Oh, no. No, it was a complete surprise to him, as it was to me, and I think to the prison guards as well. Afterward, he was extremely happy that he wasn't put to death. To me, this is very important to underscore. His attorney, who had defended him when he was originally arrested, had made a statement that Jeff had a death wish and wanted to die. There's a certain amount of truth to that in the sense that he felt very guilty and remorseful. However, immediately following this attack, he was happy that he was alive yet. He was thankful, he was praising God that the guy didn't kill me. It wasn't, oh, drat that Cuban, he messed up. That wasn't the feeling at all. So I didn't have the sense that he wanted to die, but there was no sense from him that he anticipated this or at all, because as I mentioned, I asked him, well, how do you get along with the other prisoners? I got along great. This happened to be an exception, is what he said.
I think one of the news stories said something about he had a kind of a death wish, and that he he was hoping that somebody would put him out of his ministry. Did you see that when you worked with him?
No, not at all. I think that may have existed prior to my coming on the scene. As I got to know him week after week after week, it became very clear that he began looking forward to my arrival and what more things we could discover from the Bible and how we could kind of apply this to his life and cause him to grow into a shining example of what a Christian could be, given the circumstances of which he was living, which of course was the bleakest that you could possibly imagine.
I think we'll take another call. I think we still have some people waiting. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I would like to talk like the pastor guy.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering, he just immediately baptized him. He had to do nothing for you or show no real remorse or anything for it?
He had shown remorse on several occasions. He simply made the request to be baptized. I asked him why he wanted to be baptized. Did he understand what it was all for? And he was convincing to me that that's what he wanted to do. He knew that he needed to have his sins taken care of. And so I took him at face value. Yes, I didn't make him dance a jig or do so many sit-ups or whatever you would want to make him do.
Well, back in the Middle Ages, the Pope, someone wrote a bad letter to him. In order for that person to have his sins cleared, the Pope made him stand in the snow for 3 days. I mean, that's just a letter. I mean, Dahmer killed how many people? I mean, he should have gotten it. It has at least something.
He was serving, 17 life terms in prison, so he wasn't going anywhere. He was being punished.
Yes, he was being punished. I'm not certain exactly what you're talking about. I can't help what a pope did once.
You're thinking he should be punished more than he was, Colin?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, at least by the church.
Well, I don't normally beat people, lash them or whatever. That's just not my understanding. I don't think it's proper for me to try to impose a greater sense of guilt on someone than they already have. He was carrying a weight of guilt by himself, and I didn't think it was proper for me to try to, shame on you, bad boy. I didn't think that was proper at all.
Okay, thanks a lot, caller. It was pretty obvious between the two of you that if this was death penalty state, first of all, he probably wouldn't have been doing what he was doing because he knew the consequences at the end of it. He was in a safe state where there is no death penalty, but weighing everything, he wasn't. I mean, he was never going to get out. 33 years old, he could live to be 83. So for the next 50 years, that was his home.
Yes. In fact, I anticipated that we were going to grow old together studying the Bible. It's what I thought we would do. I didn't anticipate his death at all. But yes, there was no sense of his getting out early or getting off easy or anything of that nature.
Sometimes that's more punishment than being executed.
Well, possibly, yes.
Okay, go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about a couple callers back. Actually, I have two comments, but a couple of calls back, and one of the guys at Colini started talking about he's glad that Jeffrey Dahmer got beat and everything, and he died the way he did. Or I don't know exactly how to word it, but it's not good that somebody got beat, and it's still a human life. And it's bad what he did, but you know what I'm saying, though?
Yeah.
And then the second comment I have is it's not related to Jeffrey Dahmer. It's just one of my pet peeves that I have to get off. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I really don't like it when people come in, like, just say a fast food restaurant, say, and they order like all this food and they give you coupons that are expired and for food that's like, you know what I mean?
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go to another call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
I want to know did you ever discuss with Jeffrey Dahmer what he wanted most in life?
What he wanted most in life?
Yes, sir.
No, I don't think so. You're talking about like a gift or something he wanted to accomplish, perhaps?
Just like what besides he'd want, when he was in prison, what did he discuss anything that he would want instead of if he wasn't in prison?
Oh, no, we never really discussed the idea of his ever being out of prison or what it would be like if he weren't in prison. I think he could have become a very good person had he been converted before all his crimes, and I think he had a very good personality about him, a very winning kind of personality. I think he could have done a lot of good. but he illustrates how low one can sink when there's no place for God in one's life. I think he's a powerful demonstration of that.
Did he ever talk about what he wanted to do now in prison, that he was a Christian? Did he talk about a future of trying to win?
No, we didn't really get into that very much. He did ask for various literatures that he could pass out to the other prisoners, and I would try to get him some, and others that had written into him, he would try to get them to send him some, and some of that he was able to do, and then some of it the prison simply confiscated. They wouldn't allow him to do that. A lot of it was due to the fact that his high celebrity status, anything he did, if he burps, then they get in trouble, so they were very nervous about his doing anything of that nature. He did want to share with others his understanding of faith, but it was very difficult for him to overcome the restrictions the prison were putting up on him.
So about the only time he had any kind of freedom was when he went to chapel or when he was with you? Is that pretty...
My understanding, I don't really fully understand how his day went, but my understanding is that he spent most of his time in his cell, that he had a certain amount of time out for work programs, and then he had a little bit of free time. I know there was one time after our visit, it was in the summertime, and instead of going to his cell, he went outside into their little yard, like recess or playtime or whatever that they were doing outside. So I know they had a little bit of time out. I know on another occasion, he had mentioned that there was something going on with the guards. They had to see a special kind of film or something like this about how to prevent themselves from contracting AIDS. So there was not going to be any free time. So he was going to stay in his cell. So I got the impression he probably stayed in his cell like 22 hours a day or 23 hours a day, and he was only out on certain occasions. That's the impression that I have.
So he had a single cell. He didn't have a...
That's right. Yeah, he had no roommate.
Did he eat in his cell, or did he go to a dining hall or something?
I believe he went to a dining hall and ate in an open dining area.
Okay, we'll take another call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, Chuck, Fred, Pastor, welcome to Eau Claire.
Thank you.
I guess I got a comment and two questions. Being an ex-con myself, I'm surprised Dahmer lasted that long in a prison. And one of the questions is to the pastor is, did you have any problem with your congregation kind of looking down on you for getting involved with this man?
No.
And the other question would be, and I'll ask it and then I'll hang up and listen to your answer. If I know what the Christian thing is and everything, but if this happened to your kid, or Fred, this happened to your kid, could you be sitting there talking about it? Thank you.
No, the congregation where I'm at was not upset or angry at me for what had occurred. To the opposite end, they were kind of honored. They were glad that I was willing to do this and that I could play a part in it. So, I didn't have any backlash as far as my own people were concerned.
I'll tell you, you think about it, if it was your son or daughter, I'm sure there'd be some anger that'd well up in you. And
oh, sure. Yes. I could understand that. I can understand how the victims' families can react the way they have. It's very difficult for them. In fact, there were two members of one of the victims' sisters. Two sisters of one of the victims was at the memorial service. And it was very uncomfortable, but they were there because they'd grown very close to Mr. and Mrs. Lionel Dahmer. And so they were there for that purpose. And so although we were there to talk about Jeff, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to them a little bit about the things they'd gone through, and it seemed to comfort them a little bit too. But everyone understands that the kind of anger they would feel because it was their own relative.
okay, leading up to the Jeffrey being murdered, and that was November 28th of last year, 1994. You were meeting with him on a weekly basis. What was your last meeting?
Our last meeting was the day before Thanksgiving. That's when he'd given me this card. It was kind of a full of Thanksgiving thing. What are you going to do for Thanksgiving? That sort of talk. And we'd begun meeting, and in the process of the meeting, I'd begun asking him, well, how's it going with your mother and with your father? He talked to them on the phone every week. And he had certain concerns about them and what he wanted, and we would pray about that. And then he asked how things are going with my family. And then we launched into our study. At that particular day, we were working our way through the book of Revelation, and we were about halfway through. So we were doing like chapters 8 and 9. So we we were going through them and studying them and talking about them, and then when we reached the end of that time, usually the guard would knock on the window and give us 5 fingers or 3 fingers or however much time we had left. So then we'd stop what our study was and conclude it, and then we took turns praying, and that happened to be his turn to pray. So he prayed, and his prayer was full of all the Thanksgiving spirit and whatever. And he'd received a card from my wife, I think, the day before, so he was really grateful for her sending him a card, and he wanted me to have a card, and then we shook hands, and he said, "I'll see you next week." And that was the last time that I saw him and the last words that he ever spoke to me.
You know that with this, I think in our prisons, they don't emphasize the spiritual part of life, which is the most important. And if we're going to keep people out of prison or keep them from coming back, one good way to do it is through our Lord.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that's one reason why prison ministries is a valuable and a valid line of work. Even though some of the callers question whether you're wasting your time on something, this is really something valuable there.
Okay, we'll take another call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Chuck. I'd like to, for you to specifically list your credentials and how you've to this vast array of knowledge that you have given us on your show for weeks and weeks, and congratulations on the success of your show.
Okay, thank you. Well, if you watch the show, then you'll know what's going on. We've been doing this for several years. I've been doing shows on public access for about 8 years. Fred's been with me now, what, about 3 years, Fred?
No, I don't recall when we started.
Okay, go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah. How you doing, Chuck?
Okay.
Old common man fella here again.
All right.
First of all, it's good to see that Fred made it there. This nasty snow weather we got here. Might be part of the reason why Mr. Plombot didn't make it. I don't know. But anyway, I've been kind of listening to all this here. I guess there was a little bit of question, I guess, earlier about the sincerity, I guess, maybe of Jeffrey Dahmer as far as whether or not he got saved or anything. I was just kind of thinking, it kind of made me think because, I've had an experience with I was a former car dealer, and I went in there, to buy the car, thought everything was fine, and the guy has a picture of Jesus on his wall. It's a clock, actually, but it's a picture of Jesus on a clock. And I can say right now that car is the worst lemon I ever got stuck with. And he was, let's just say, this fellow, this ex-car dealer, was definitely not the nice, honest person he was. I don't know. I'm not saying, maybe, I guess the only way I'll ever find out, any of us will ever find out if Dahmer was really sincere is I guess those of us who get to heaven if we find him up there, I guess. But the only thing I can say is that, it's very hard sometimes to tell if somebody's really sincere about their belief.
Okay, well, thank you. Common Man has another TV program on this channel, and what would be your answer to him about that, about sincerity and whether Jeffrey was trying to con you, I guess?
Well, Jeff wasn't trying to sell me a car. He wasn't trying to sell me anything at all. I simply asked him why he wanted to do this, and his answer expressed to me the idea that he really wanted to do this because he felt a deep sense of guilt and remorse for his sins. That's the correct answer. I don't know what is gained by his fooling me, and if he did fool me, I'm the only one that he fooled, apparently, because everyone else questions the sincerity. It doesn't really matter. I'm willing to be the fool if that's what it takes. But I was convinced that that's what he wanted to do, and I met with him, and all through those meetings, from May through November, he was consistent, it was constant. I had the full sense that he was very devout and very sincere, and others had noticed a change in his character and his personality. All that adds up to sincerity, in my understanding. To me, it's moot to argue the sincerity point. As he said, we'll find out when we get there, obviously. But I don't know, I guess if you don't care to believe that he was sincere, that's your opinion.
Well, looking back at it now, the time frame there, you met him in April, and
Mm-hmm.
he's dead in November. Does that tell you anything? Is there the hand of God working in there, or did?
Oh, sure. Yeah. In fact, that's one of the things. He became a personal friend of mine, you see. And so when I heard about his death, I was about to go into the grocery store to go grocery shopping when I heard about his death. And it was very difficult to finish the grocery shopping because I didn't know whether this was true or you know, the story was kind of vague. As soon as I got home, there were numerous calls waiting me on an answering machine, and then while I'm trying to listen to that, I'm getting phone calls all the time. On that very first day, I went through numerous interviews with various televisions and magazines and radios, and you know, all through that. I never really had an opportunity to do any mourning of my own. Although I was in a state of grief because I'd lost a friend, I didn't have a chance to kind of go off to a corner and kind of say, well, poor old Jeff. I had to kind of analyze his whole life right then and there. And one of the things I was forced to really deal with was, why was I given such a short time to deal with him? And the only conclusion I could reach is that God knew his time was short, and he needed to have his soul prepared to meet God. And that's what my work really was all about. So that's one reason why we didn't really spend much time talking about just exactly how did that arm taste when you chewed on it. We didn't really deal with the grossness of his sins. We didn't deal with how did you feel when you're going through those. Those were irrelevant. We were dealing with how do I develop into a Christian now, given the context of the life in which he's living in. And we worked very hard to try to develop him so that he could begin to grow into the spirit and the image of what Jesus Christ is all about.
I think we have time for another call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I want to know if Jeff had any remorse for what he did in his life.
Yes, he stated that on several occasions. He had a great feeling of remorse and guilt for the things he had done.
Okay, thank you, caller. He never did discuss the crimes then with you at all?
No, that was not something for us to get into. The closest he ever came to that on one occasion, we were studying something else in Revelation, and he had mentioned that that's something like what he had experienced. I don't know if it was Revelation or Hebrews we were at, but he said as long as he was able to hide what he had done, you know, from others, to a great extent he hid it from himself. He didn't have to think about it. He could pretend like nothing was going on. But once, of course, it was brought into the open, then he had to deal with it. He had to come to terms with it. And I thought, well, that's very much like all of us. We can be extremely cruel, very harsh, very mean. We can hurt members of our own family. We can commit incest. We can, child abuse or wife abuse or husband abuse. But as long as no one knows about it, as long as the bruises are covered up, everything's fine. No one knows anything's wrong. But once it's brought into the open, then we've got to come to terms with it. And either we deny it and say, no, you made a mistake, he fell down, or else we come to terms with it. And that's pretty much the same thing that happened with him. He was just covering it up, and part of the cover-up was for himself as well as for the police and others.
Well, I guess we do have time for one more call. That last one was kind of short. Go ahead, caller.
I have a very good question. I've been following the Dahmer trial, and I know that he's a very intelligent man. And I know that he knew what he was doing when he got and admitted to all the crimes, because he'd be safe from maybe a lynch mob down in Milwaukee from the victims, like relatives and friends and stuff. And he was pretty safe in the Portage prison. Now, do you know that he was very intelligent? So you said yourself that his only free time was pretty much with you, Pastor. So do you think he might have been manipulating you so he could get out of his cell a little more often?
Thank you.
No, I don't think that. And although I've heard many people say they thought he was very intelligent, he never impressed me that way himself. He was very well read. He read an awful lot of stuff. But I guess it depends on what you mean by intelligence and so forth. He didn't impress me with that kind of cunning. Although I know he showed it earlier, he didn't impress me with that kind of cunning in my relationship with him. He came across as a totally genuine and honest person. So I don't have any sense of his manipulating me just to get out of a cell.
Okay, we just have enough time to say you had a memorial service then for Jeffrey, and he said his parents showed up, and also some of the victims' relatives.
Yes, two of the sisters of one of the victims.
Well, we have enough time to ask you where do you think Jeffrey's at right now?
Well, because of the nature of my faith and the kind of person I was working with and dealing with, I have to say that anyone who puts their faith in God, reaches out to Jesus and tries to embrace Jesus and says, okay, I believe you when you say, if you trust in me and obey me, that your sins will be taken away. Jeff did all that, and so I have to believe that the promises God gives to all of us would apply to Jeff as well. So I think he's in the hands of a loving God.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, and we appreciate it. We'll see you again next week on the Cow Report.
Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, Conservative Report. Conservative
Corner with Rez
Right.
Camper. I want to thank you, Pastor, for driving up here. I want to thank you, audience, for calling in. Thanks for the questions. We'll see you next Monday at 2 p.m. Good evening.